The lights in the grand international studio were blindingly bright. Flags from dozens of nations shimmered in the background. The stage was polished to perfection. Cameras from BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and others zoomed in for one moment, the meeting of two legends. Morgan Freeman walked toward Captain Ibrahim Traoré with that familiar, gentle smile. The world adored Morgan, his voice, his wisdom, his soul. And here he was, ready to embrace Africa's young, defiant son. Traoré stood calmly, dressed in full military uniform, yet peaceful in posture. Millions watched live. Just before their hug, Traoré leaned in. He whispered something. Morgan froze. At first, just silence. Then something terrifyingly real flickered across Morgan's face. His lips trembled, his knees slightly buckled. The cameras caught it. His eyes flooded with tears. He stepped back, and in front of the entire world, Morgan Freeman began to cry. The room went dead silent. Nobody knew what Traoré had said, but the look in Morgan's eyes, it was as if a lifetime of pain had been unlocked in one quiet sentence. Twitter exploded. Everyone was asking, what did Traoré whisper? The answer would shake the world. Backstage, producers scrambled. "Morgan, are you okay?" one asked, gently grabbing his shoulder. Morgan couldn't speak. He wiped his eyes, then sat down, staring into nothing. The broadcast quickly cut to music, but clips of that moment were already going viral. What did Traoré say was trending worldwide? In Burkina Faso, people gathered around radios. In South Africa, tears streamed down the face of a grandmother watching from her small couch. In Chicago, New York, Nairobi, and Paris, the same question repeated over and over. What did Ibrahim Traoré whisper that made Morgan Freeman break? 20 minutes later, a private camera caught Morgan sitting with his hands over his mouth, whispering to himself, "My God, how didn't I know?" Hours passed. Morgan finally spoke to a small group of trusted journalists off camera. His voice cracked. He didn't accuse me. He didn't yell. He said it like a father would say to a son who forgot something sacred. One journalist leaned in. "Can you tell us what he said?" Morgan paused. He said, "My grandfather died building a country your grandfather was never told existed." And suddenly, everyone in the room felt the earth tilt beneath them. The next day, Morgan Freeman asked for something he'd never done before. He wanted to fly to Burkina Faso, quietly, privately. He didn't want to speak to cameras. He just wanted to see, to feel. Captain Traoré approved the visit, personally. When Morgan landed, he didn't walk out with bodyguards. He came out with a small journal and trembling hands. Traoré met him at the airport. They didn't speak much, just nodded. They drove far, beyond the cities, past the villages, into the dry, red heart of the land. There, under a neem tree, was a grave. No tombstone, just a stone, and a pair of sandals half buried in the dirt. Traoré bent down and touched the sandals. "This was my grandfather's spot," he said. "He died carrying bricks for a dam, built to send water to French farms, not our people." Morgan swallowed hard. His chest tightened. "He died here, but we were never allowed to mourn. His name was erased, but I remember." Morgan dropped to one knee. He touched the stone, and he cried, for a man he'd never met, for a pain he'd never known. Morgan stood still by the unmarked grave, the African sun beating down. Traoré remained silent, his gaze lost in the red dust. Finally, Morgan spoke. "Why didn't I know this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Traoré looked at him gently. "Because no one thought you needed to." Morgan's eyes filled again. "I've narrated documentaries about Africa. I've spoken of peace, of resilience. but no one ever handed me this page. Traoré nodded. That's why I whispered it. Some things must be passed quietly, like sacred stories around a fire. Morgan reached into his jacket and pulled out his journal. He scribbled something. Traoré glanced over. The page read, "Truth is not loud. Sometimes it cries." A nearby elder, watching quietly, stepped forward. He handed Morgan a folded cloth, old, dusty, hand-stitched. His only shirt, the elder said. He wore it the day he collapsed. Morgan held the cloth to his chest. He didn't speak for a long time. The next morning, Morgan Freeman asked to meet the elder again. They sat under the neem tree where the grave was. The elder's name was Baba Sekou, and he was the last living friend of Traoré's grandfather. He was strong, Baba said. He lifted stones no man could carry, but they never gave him a name in the records. Morgan looked confused. What do you mean? Colonial officials called him Unit 78-4. That was his worker number. He wasn't allowed to use his real name on paper. To them, he was nobody. Morgan covered his mouth, stunned. His name was Zure Mamadou, a father, a husband, a builder. Morgan felt something break inside. We have streets in my country named after generals who never touched African soil, he said. But this man, who carried the foundation, he doesn't even have a stone. Baba smiled sadly. Now he has you. Morgan wiped a tear. He made a decision. I'll give him more than a stone, he said. I'll give him a voice. He didn't know how, but something inside him had shifted forever. That evening, a short video clip surfaced online. It showed Morgan Freeman in Burkina Faso, standing beside Captain Traoré, holding the old shirt in his hands, whispering to the grave, "You are remembered." The video exploded. Over 9 million views in 12 hours. Hashtags flooded social media. Zure Mamadou. Africa remembers. Morgan in Burkina. In New York, college students wept watching the clip. In Lagos, journalists began investigating other unnamed laborers. In Paris, angry arguments broke out on TV. But not everyone was happy. Some powerful voices wanted the video taken down. It disrupts the global narrative, one European news editor said off camera. Freeman should stick to acting. But the world didn't agree. The next morning, Captain Traoré received a message from a school teacher in Brazil. It simply read, "For the first time, my students are asking who really built the world." He showed the message to Morgan. Morgan smiled through tears. Then maybe this was the hug the world truly needed. But they didn't know. A storm was coming. And what Traoré had planned next would make history. Morgan didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his hotel bed in Ouagadougou, holding the old shirt close, staring at the soft fabric worn by time. A knock came at the door. It was Traoré. "There's something else," he said. "My mother found it 2 days ago, buried in an old clay jar behind my grandfather's hut." He handed Morgan a yellowed envelope. On it was written in shaky French, "To the man who one day will understand." Morgan carefully opened it. Inside, a folded letter, written by Zure Mamadou, Traoré's grandfather. "I don't speak the language of the men who rule us," it read, "but I write this hoping one day someone with power will feel what we carry. Not all chains are made of iron. Some are silence." Morgan's hands trembled. He read every word, tears falling like rain. This letter, it wasn't angry. It was aching. "Please don't let them forget that we built with our backs and were buried with no names." That night, Morgan made a promise to himself. He would break the silence, no matter the cost. The next morning, Morgan called his team in the U.S. He wanted the world to hear Zure Mamadou's words. "We'll produce a short film," he said, "narrated by me, based only on this letter. No music, no effects, just truth." But things moved fast. Too fast. A few hours later, Traoré's security informed him that two major European media firms were pressuring broadcasters not to air the video. Quiet emails were circulating, warning that it could stir unrest and reignite historical wounds. Morgan shook his head. "That's exactly the point," he said. "The wound never closed." Then his phone rang. It was a major Hollywood executive. "Morgan, listen. This thing, it's risky. You don't want to go political this deep. Just let the moment pass." Morgan took a deep breath. "I'm not going political. I'm going human." He hung up. Captain Traoré smiled quietly. "That's why I whispered it to you," he said. "Because the world might hear your voice, even if it won't listen to mine." Morgan nodded. "Then let's make it loud." What came next would shake every corner of the globe. 3 days later, the video was uploaded. Just black screen and Morgan Freeman's voice reading Zure Mamadou's letter line by line. No dramatic music, no flag waving, just pain, dignity, memory. They built railroads through our villages, but never taught us where they went. We gave our sons to war, but never saw them return. We died thirsty, as water flowed through pipes we were not allowed to touch. By the end, Morgan's voice cracked. "Don't remember me for the chains. Remember me for how we walked despite them." The internet exploded. Millions shared it. Even children watched and wept. In France, students walked out of classrooms holding signs with the words, "Remember Mamadou." In Washington, African American leaders demanded that the U.S. Department of Education include the letter in Black History Month. In Burkina Faso, thousands gathered by Zure Mamadou's grave in silence. Morgan and Traoré watched from a rooftop. No words, just silence, and the wind. For the first time in decades, the world paused and listened. But something even more powerful was still coming. Something that would make even world leaders cry. 3 days after the video went viral, something unexpected happened. A personal letter arrived for Captain Ibrahim Traoré and Morgan Freeman, stamped with the blue seal of the United Nations. They had been officially invited to speak at a global assembly titled History, Dignity, and the Forgotten Builders of Nations. Morgan raised an eyebrow. "They've never invited me to something like this before." Traoré smiled faintly. "They're not inviting you. They're inviting him," he said, pointing to the envelope. "To Mamadou's name." The room went silent. They agreed. 2 weeks later, the massive UN hall in New York was packed. Diplomats, presidents, professors, students, all watching. The world expected a political debate. What they got instead was truth. Traoré stepped up first. Calm, measured. He didn't speak with anger. He didn't speak with blame. He simply held up Mamadou's letter. "This is not a weapon. This is not revenge. This is a memory. And we cannot heal what we refuse to remember." There wasn't a single dry eye in the room. But it was Morgan's words next that would change everything. Morgan Freeman took the podium slowly. For a moment he didn't speak. He just looked at the faces in front of him. The powerful, the wealthy, the distant. Then, with his deep voice, he said, "I've narrated stories about freedom, struggle, and justice. I've been trusted to carry history in my voice. But I didn't know this page." He held up the worn, handwritten letter. "I was blind," he continued, "but I spoke anyway. I spoke without asking who was missing from the story." The room was completely silent. I read scripts about heroes, while men like Zure Mamadou died nameless in fields they never owned, building roads they could never walk freely. One delegate from Switzerland began to cry. A young man from Senegal stood up and placed his hand on his heart. Morgan's final words echoed through the hall. "Today, I return the microphone to the people who were never given one." He stepped back, tears running down his face. And in that moment, without noise, without protest. A truth broke through walls that had stood for centuries. It wasn't a political event anymore. It was a reckoning. As the audience stood in silence, something unexpected happened. A small voice called out from the back of the hall. "Excuse me, can I say something?" It was a boy, maybe 10 years old, African American, standing beside his teacher in the viewing gallery. A few guards stepped forward, unsure what to do, but Morgan smiled and nodded. "Let him speak," he said. The boy walked up nervously, holding a small notebook. He looked at Captain Traoré, then Morgan, then the crowd. "My name is Elijah. I'm in 5th grade. We watched your video in class, and I told my mom that I didn't want to be rich anymore. I wanted to be truthful." The room gasped. "I want to help finish what Mamadou started," Elijah said. "I want to help people remember." A thunderous applause followed. Diplomats wept. Journalists forgot their cameras. Captain Traoré walked up and knelt beside Elijah. "That's how we win," he whispered, "one memory at a time." That photo of the captain and the boy would go on to be printed on magazine covers around the world. But even then, the full story wasn't done, because what happened next would shake even more powerful corners of the world. 2 weeks after the UN Assembly, a retired historian from France named Claire Morel watched the video of Morgan Freeman's speech. She paused at the name, Zouré Mamadou. She had seen that name before, buried deep in an archive in Marseille years ago. A list of forced African laborers used to build infrastructure during the 1950s. She searched her files, and there it was, Zouré Mamadou, worker number 78-4, assigned to Project Eau Blanche, a dam in West Africa that diverted clean water to French colonial estates. Claire gasped. Next to his name was a note, "Collapsed during work, body unrecovered." Yet Traoré had shown the grave. She picked up her phone and called a journalist. "They erased him on paper," she whispered, "but they didn't bury the truth deep enough." The journalist asked, "Why come forward now?" Claire answered, "Because I helped write books that left people like Mamadou out, and now I have a chance to make it right." She scanned the document, signed her name, and released it to the world. Within hours, it was all over the news, and people started asking a dangerous question: how many more like Mamadou were erased? The next morning, international news panels lit up. On one side, voices calling for truth, reparations, and global acknowledgement of Africa's buried labor force. On the other, powerful voices urging people to let history rest. In one heated broadcast, a European professor said, "We can't rewrite the past. What's done is done." A young Nigerian student responded live, "We're not trying to rewrite history. We're trying to finish the part you skipped." The clip went viral. Morgan Freeman was invited to speak again, but this time he declined. Instead, he posted a simple video sitting on a bench in Burkina Faso, beside Captain Traoré. "We didn't come here to start a fight," Morgan said. "We came here to open a page." Traoré added softly, "The world is not divided by skin. It's divided by who chooses to remember and who chooses to forget." They ended the video with one sentence together: "Let's not forget again." In response, universities around the world began holding open lectures titled "The Forgotten Builders." Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, something incredible was being built, brick by brick, and Morgan didn't even know it yet. Captain Traoré quietly coordinated a massive construction project outside Ouagadougou. There were no reporters, no public announcements, just workers, volunteers, mothers, elders, even children helped carry stones. They called it the Monument of Silence. A single black stone tower rising from the red earth, surrounded by 1,000 nameless slabs. Each slab stood for a soul, Someone who was never recorded, but whose labor shaped nations. No gold, no flags, just memory carved into silence. Morgan arrived weeks later and stood before the monument. He was speechless. Traoré handed him a small chisel and pointed to one empty slab. "Write his name," he said. With trembling hands, Morgan carved, "Zure Mamadou Builder, father, buried, but not broken." As he stepped back, tears filled his eyes again. Hundreds had gathered behind him, not to protest, not to mourn, but simply to witness. Children sang softly in the background, an old melody from Mamadou's village passed down through whispers. At that moment, Morgan whispered, "Now he's louder than ever." And across the world, more people were waking up, because this wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about millions. 2 days after the Monument of Silence was revealed, Morgan Freeman received a letter from someone unexpected. It was from Zure Mamadou's granddaughter, an elderly woman who had remained in hiding during the war. She had heard about the monument. She had watched the UN speech. Her letter read, "All my life, I thought my grandfather died forgotten. I never told my children his name because I feared it would bring shame. But now, thanks to you and Traoré, my grandson sings it in school." Morgan clutched the letter to his chest. He showed it to Captain Traoré. Traoré smiled softly and said, "This is the real history book now, the kind that heals." That night, the world watched in silence as the monument was lit with hundreds of candles, one for each name lost in colonial silence. Morgan read aloud one final line from Mamadou's original letter. "May our bones rest only when our names return." For the first time in decades, people across the continent and across oceans began to speak the names of their ancestors out loud. The world wasn't just watching anymore. The world was remembering. A month later, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before the African Union in Addis Ababa. Every seat was filled. Morgan Freeman sat in the front row. This wasn't a political summit. It was something more. Traoré stepped up to the podium, wearing a simple white shirt. No military medals, no titles, just truth. He took a deep breath and began. "For too long, we've tried to heal by forgetting. But true healing comes when we remember, not to divide, but to dignify." He paused. Zure Mamadou was one of millions, not soldiers, not politicians, just fathers, mothers, laborers, children, forgotten in books but burned into the land. Tears rolled down many faces. We don't ask for guilt. We don't ask for pity. We ask for acknowledgement. For our children to know their roots are not shameful, but sacred. He turned to Morgan. "Thank you for listening, for carrying the whisper louder than any speech." The room stood in thunderous applause, but it wasn't noise that filled the hall. It was something deeper. Grief, pride, healing. For the first time, the world felt like it was moving forward, together. Morgan Freeman returned to the same international stage where it all began. Same lights, same cameras, same quiet hum of expectation. But this time there was no whisper, no tears. He stood beside Ibrahim Traoré, who simply said, "The world asked what I whispered. But maybe the real question is, why did it take so long for someone to hear?" Morgan turned to the crowd and said, "That whisper wasn't just for me. It was for all of us. A whisper of memory, of dignity, of what was hidden, now seen." Behind them, a screen lit up with the words, "For the builders without names." Around the world, children repeated it in classrooms, artists painted it on city walls, journalists printed it on front pages. It had begun with a whisper. Now it was a roar. If this story touched your heart, if you cried for Mamadou, if you now hear the whispers of the forgotten, please like this video so it reaches someone who still doesn't know. Comment below the name of a loved one who deserves to be remembered. Subscribe to this channel, so together we can carry stories that were never allowed to be told. Because sometimes, a whisper is all it takes to wake the world.